Hey, Glenn here, the People's Carpenter. You know, sometimes in life, or in projects, you feel like you're getting nowhere because you can't see any big, cool, exciting, beautiful, interesting changes happening right in front of your eyes. But actually, there's still some really important stuff going on, and you're plugging away at the things that must be done before those big, dramatic, beautiful, cool, awesome changes can happen. And that's kind of what this video is about when it comes to this project. I've taken this slab, which is going to be the top of a walnut slab coffee table, and I'm doing a bunch of necessary things to it. And all those necessary things together take up a bit of time, enough time to fill an entire video. And they're important skills, and they're important parts of the process that you should be prepared for and know how to do. They're just not what we think of as the really cool, exciting bits that we like to do, but they've got to be done. This is the worst affected part of the slab in terms of old insect damage, and you can really see the difference between the hardwood and the sapwood. The hardwood has some bug holes in it, but not very many. The sapwood is softer than the hardwood, and so the bugs find it much easier to get in there. Maybe it's less toxic to them as well, I don't know, but for whatever reason, this is what they've gone for. And there are a few approaches that you can take to filling bug holes. I haven't taken all of them myself because I don't have a whole lot of experience doing this, but I'm about to get some. Now you can make up a paste of wood dust and your ordinary PVA glue. There are drawbacks to that though. It will shrink somewhat, but I guess that could be okay if you start by overfilling the holes, but I'm not going to take that approach here just because I'm going to try some different things. Specifically, I'm going to try two things, well, with these holes anyway. I'm going to use resin on some of the other ones, but I've got some filler. That's one option. You can buy walnut coloured filler, but of course when it says walnut, that means the heartwood, which is the dark brown stuff. And well, this is not the same colour, obviously. This is a very pale wood, not quite as pale as the poplar that I've got, and so I've had to kind of think about what type of wood in terms of colour that resembles. I bought some pine filler because I think that might be an approximate match. Yeah, that looks pretty good, doesn't it? Well, I think it looks pretty good. And another method that I'm going to try, I've got some hardwood dowels, which were sold to me as maple. They may be maple, it doesn't matter if they're not, it's the colour that's important. And that's, yeah, not an exact match, but it's... Now, whatever you do, the holes will still be visible to an extent, but the closer the match, the better. So that's kind of a similar colour. So I've got a 3mm drill bit to match the size of these dowels, and I'm going to try drilling and gluing a dowel into some of these holes as well to see what produces the best result. So, just to see what I like the best, I'm going to try both of those right now. I'm going to try both of these holes here, just to get a side-by-side comparison. Just remember the one on the left is going to have filler in it. Now, I suppose you might want to use gloves, but this stuff's not harmful. Just wash your hands. Alright, so in terms of colour, that's a decent match. That's not bad at all. I'm going to very slightly overfill it. It's not supposed to shrink, but just in case it does, because, you know, be cynical enough not to trust that things will work perfectly. Alright, so that's one filled. And the one right next to it, I'm going to drill out. So this is made far more of a mess with the glue than I did with the filler, but that's okay. So I'll come back to that later and sand that flat, and then chances are they'll look about as good as each other, and I'll just pick a method and use it. So it's the following day, and I've just sanded the filler back. And if you look closely, you can see the spots where the filler was, where the filler is, but it's nowhere near as obvious as where the wooden dowels were. And I mean, the wood looked a better colour initially, but of course what's exposed there is end grain, so it's just going to look slightly different. But that's good, man. Filler works. Okay, so let's do some filling of the big voids, especially that crack, which, I'll just hold this up to the light. I can't see all the way through it, but I'm fairly certain it does work its way all the way through. This is the top side of the table now. Right, that should keep us safe. I bought some mixing cups for this purpose. They're far larger than I need. Definitely overkill, but they were a really good price. So, alright, now I don't know what things are like in your part of the world, but epoxy resin of any decent quality is expensive stuff. Like, just, I find it prohibitively expensive. This is a 4:1 ratio. 1 part hardener to 4 parts resin. Yeah, I really did want a smaller cup. I'm going to end up making far too much just because of the size of the units. Okay, that's alright. That's alright. I might even, if I have to, just coat the bottom with resin. No harm will actually be done. I think I've mixed that good and proper. It's warming up. The chemical reaction does produce heat. Now I guess I just pour it in. And as I do so, I'm going to use my heat gun to warm things up and make it runny. The heat will also help to remove the bubbles. You can use a torch, a flame torch of some kind, but a heat gun is good. I think the reason most people don't use a heat gun is that it can blow dust around, and you don't want dust in your resin. This goes on very thick. I definitely am not going to apply a second coat. It won't be needed. Okay, so it turns out I made far too much for the initial job that I was going to do, but I made pretty much exactly the right amount for coating the whole underside, so must have been meant to be. Now, while epoxy is still wet, I'm told you can clean it up with acetone. Maybe that's starting to go too tacky for the bubbles to burst. I will give it a light scuffing and polishing once it's cured. Okay, there are going to be small bubbles appearing for a little while coming up out of those holes, rather like when you're at the beach and there's a hole made by a shellfish. But I'm just going to leave that for now. I'll come back. I want to give it a proper amount of time to cure, so I'll come back in a couple of days and then see how we're doing. That will probably be sufficient. It's quite warm at the moment. It's mid-spring. I'm sanding the epoxy flat. I say flat, but the truth is, being on the underside, it doesn't have to be perfectly flat, but it does have to be smooth. I don't want any sudden obvious ridges or pointy little bumps on it, so I'm just making it quite smooth. I've started with some 120 grit, and on my sander, I'm using this intermediary pad. I guess you could call it that. It's a soft pad, and that's because I really want to avoid accidentally, say, digging in one way or the other with my sander and cutting through the epoxy. Yeah, I mean, you might have thought it was reasonably smooth to begin with, but it wasn't really, because there were some areas where I've sort of moved stuff to make sure I've covered all the areas and whatnot. So I'll go over this with 120, then 240. I might then go over it with 400. I won't get carried away, but once I've reached that, I'll then give it a polish. Okay, now I didn't have to go up to 1,000, but I was on a roll, so why not? Once you start getting very fine, the water just helps to carry away the slush that you're creating. I had previously thought that I wouldn't go all the way and use my polishing machine, but why not? Let's just see what happens. Won't do any harm. So this is just ordinary auto cutting compound. Won't have the speed all the way up, I'll keep it about halfway. Okay, well I'm glad I did that. It does look much nicer. So I was going to touch the bald bits on the edges where I sanded through touch them up with whatever oil I used on the surface, and that might have been okay, but I've decided not to. What I'm actually doing is I've made up a small amount of epoxy and I'm painting the sides again, and I will not recoat. Will not resand or polish. It's very thin, given the way that I'm painting it on, and that'll do. It's certainly making all those somewhat unsightly patches of wood disappear. Won't be super glossy, but that's all right. Doesn't need to be. That will be perfectly okay. So that's what I'm doing. I'll do the same anywhere it looks like I've rubbed through. Alright, so now we're looking at the top side. All these drips of epoxy will be sanded off easily. Okay, well, that looks pretty good. So obviously that crack did go all the way through. Now there's a little crack still on the surface here and there. So anything like that I will go around and touch up with a dab of epoxy here and there. Now you may be wondering why I put any sort of finish on the underside before I finished actually building the table and putting legs on. And the reason is just simplicity. It's easier to just put a finish onto a flat surface without legs sticking out of it. And the epoxy really is not primarily about beautification, it's just about protection. So I'll just drill straight through the epoxy when I put the legs in. The top, of course, will be flat at the end of the build process, so I will finish the top last. Well, having filled everything and resanding, I just see that there were some tiny little holes on the surface here. They'll be from bubbles. I don't want to make up the ridiculously small amount of epoxy that would be required to fix that. Fortunately, for very little spot fixes like that, there is an easy, quick repair. And that repair is super glue. This lid may be glued shut. Oh, there we go. Good. once dried and sanded, this stuff, I mean, it kind of looks like epoxy resin. You almost certainly won't realize there's anything there. What you can do, I don't think I'll ever do it because it's just not something I'm going to do, is you can finish the entire surface of a wooden object with super glue, and of course it dries rock hard, and then you can sand and polish it to a very high gloss, and it looks great. You wouldn't know that it was super glue. It looks like, well, it looks like an epoxy resin finish, to be honest. Okay, so I'll come back later when that's fully dry, give it a sand up. You'll never know. Honestly, you won't. Trust me. Maybe I should have put some things away before I engaged in the finishing process. You can see just sanding the top layer of epoxy and introducing water into the mix, especially, yeah, it was the water that did that, just makes stuff splatter everywhere, including on my video camera. Yeah, I mean, fortunately it just wipes off. It's kind of like dust, really. Oh boy. So obviously the edge is going to have a bit of a point to it because you've got the live edge coming up at an angle, meeting the top edge, which is reasonably flat, but I don't want it to be sharp. So with a fine piece of sandpaper, I'm just gently taking the tip off of that edge so that not too sore. If you're walking through the lounge and you whack your shin into it, I mean, it's still going to hurt like anything, but it won't cut you. Yeah, still don't do that, won't be nice. So I'm going to stop this video at this point, and I don't know, the video kind of feels like a disappointment even though I've done quite a few things. And I guess that sort of illustrates that sometimes you feel like you're not making much progress because there are no huge visual changes. I mean, at the start of this video, this was a slab of wood, this shape, and at the end of the video, this is still a slab of wood at this shape, but now it's ready to be made into a table. You can hear my dog growling, but he's actually playing a game. His favourite game in the entire world is tug-of-war with the rope, and he makes this growling noise while he does it. Thoroughly adorable. So yeah, so what have I done? Well, I filled in some holes on the sapwood caused by bugs, and I used a combination of filler and some hardwood dowels, and I ended up deciding that the filler worked better, so I went with that. Now when you zoomed right up on that patch of holes, it looked like the piece of wood was in terrible shape. It's not really, and now those holes are all filled. And then I filled in the large cracks on the back with epoxy resin and ended up coating the entire back with epoxy resin, and the sides got that reasonably smooth, especially on the sides. And now I have resanded the top and done any spot filling. So there's a lot that you have to do that isn't glamorous. You know, I was hoping that I'd be able to get onto building the legs and drilling the holes for those, drilling the mortises for the legs to go in. That's kind of fun. That's where you see big transformation happen. But sometimes on your projects it isn't like that. You're just doing stuff that feels like it's behind the scenes, but which is nonetheless really important. And life is kind of like that too, isn't it? Sometimes you're just plugging away at things that have got to be done because they're preparing you for great things, but you aren't quite there yet. Anyway, some philosophical meandering on my part. Next time, I will be ready to get straight on to building the legs and then getting on to a very interesting type of mortise and tenon, kind of, yeah, it is mortise and tenon joinery to attach the legs, which I'm quite excited about. Yeah. That's what I'll do next time, and next time it will be the last video, because once I put the legs in, I'll finish the top, and then it's over. See you soon.